Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. This Youth Month, we are placing the spotlight firmly on a topic that is so vital to the continued development of a free and fair society for all young South Africans. It is my great privilege to welcome our esteemed panel of speakers who are all key stakeholders in the fostering of inclusion and diversity across our communities. I will begin with our moderator, the highly regarded Executive Principal and Regional Head for Market Insights, Financing and Security Services for Standard Chartered, Catherine Tinavapi. She is joined by Melanie Sarju, the founder and CEO of Bliss Inclusion Solutions, where she seeks to promote inclusion and empower people living with disabilities. Melanie will also be introducing her daughter to us, who will shine a light on what it truly means to live with a disability. We are so pleased to welcome Katlego Mosache, who serves as Group Strategy and Group Marketing and Corporate Affairs Clusters Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Chairperson for Nedbank. Last but certainly not least, it is our great pleasure to be joined by Holly Heinzelman, who knows firsthand the challenges that come with living with a disability. Not only is she a dedicated law student and aspiring advocate at Wits University, Holly is also passionate about disability and chronic illness advocacy. Holly has been an active voice in this space since the age of 15, and she chairs the Wits Disability Movement, where she draws on her personal experiences of living with cerebral palsy and type 1 diabetes. Before I hand over to Catherine, I invite you all to think about your personal call to corporate South Africa to foster inclusion and diversity. Please add your calls to the chat and give a thumbs up to those you find particularly inspiring. If you have any questions for our panelists, please also add them to the chat, along with the name of the panelist who you wish to answer them. These questions will be addressed at the end of today's proceedings. Without further ado, I now invite Catherine to commence with the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Verity, and thank you to all our panelists for joining us, Georgia, Melanie, Holly, and Katlego. Thank you so much for making the time, and more importantly, thank you everyone who's joined to have this discussion on this really important topic. So the commemoration of Youth Month offers us an opportunity to acknowledge the contribution of the youth in bringing about social and political change in South Africa. But the power of the youth is not only significant historically, it's also significant today. And more than that, youth power is not something that you can demonstrate or exercise in comfort. You know, as shown by the day that started this whole commemoration, the June 16th event. It's not a comfortable discussion when youth has to challenge the status quo, has to stand up and ask for accommodations. So just like that, we've got youth today that have, the need to stand up and to challenge us. In this Youth Month event, we honor that courage and activism and of the youth of the past, and importantly, we open up a platform and we make ourselves vulnerable to the challenge of the youth, and we ask them as the youth, particularly regarding disability and inclusion in corporate SA and what that means broadly for South Africa, and we ask them, to challenge us and to tell us what their ask is. Now, in South Africa, the goal for disability inclusion in employment is 2 to 3% of individuals with disabilities to be included in the workforce. Currently, the rate is at 1 and 1.2% of the workforce in South Africa is attributed to people with disabilities. So the big diversity question that we're asking today is, despite progress in various areas of diversity and inclusion, why do significant gaps still exist in achieving true diversity and inclusion, particularly for the disabled youth? And what roles should corporates, parents, schools, and communities be playing to bridge these gaps? So as Verity has asked and invited you to do, we ask you to consider this question as you think about what your call to action for corporate South Africa is. So without further ado, I think we should get right into the questions. We've got so much to discuss. Now, my first question is for Katlego. As a corporate leader in the D&I space, what is your perspective on this big question? I mean, how are corporates tackling this issue or not? And what's your sense of progress?
Well, thank you so much, Catherine, and I appreciate the time that I've been given. Can colleagues please not think I'm disrespecting the platform? I was also tasked this morning with handling a prize-giving ceremony at the netball tournament that we're sponsoring. So the inclusion from a gender perspective already in action in that respect. And that's why I am dressed slightly less formally than the rest of the speakers here. I think that that question demands us to ask, perhaps, if you will, 3 questions, or rather make 3 statements around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the space. Diversity for us, particularly as the Green Bank, means that we understand that we are different, but also that all of us are indeed at home. And how do we allow for that difference to be expressed within the various homes or families that we would call workplaces? In the equity portion, we understand that indeed being at home makes one to comprehend that there may be older brothers and sisters who have been used to, and I'm using analogies here, having 2 to 3 pieces of chicken or meat. You'd know that grilled or fried chicken is something that is definitely a Sunday feast for some growing up. But what equity in that respect means is us understanding that some of us who have been having those pieces may have to give them up because we understand we have younger siblings who also need to partake. But also the inclusion aspect is that everyone has a place at the table in the home. And so when we approach diversity, equity, and inclusion from that respect of building a home, of maintaining a home, we want to celebrate the differences that are there, and we want to make accommodations for everyone so that indeed at the end of the day, everyone feels that they are at home, knows that they are at home, and within that home can express themselves to the best of their ability.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And you mentioned quite a few key points in there. I'm not sure, Katlego, if you want to make any specific reference to support and accommodations that make it possible to be inclusive in the sense of employees with disabilities.
Absolutely. At Nedbank, at least, we definitely also are very proud to have a, if you will, subsector of our DEI forum that is people with disabilities. It has its own chairperson and it reports to the group-wide forum on DEI. And we have also endeavored from that perspective to make the accommodations. We understand that we have upwards of 600 or so employees within the space. Yes, it is a far cry. I mean, we have 26,000 employees altogether, and we're working very hard to ensure that everybody can feel at home as we want. We have in society and within our branches particularly ensured that the very screens that we have are high contrast for people who are visually impaired or partially sighted. We do have concessions that are made for screen readers for some of our blind, if you will, colleagues. We also have made sure that at each major event that we have within the space or within group-wide activities, we do have a sign language interpreter. And so we're pushing ourselves, particularly in the workplace, to ensure how do we make sure that people with living with disabilities feel at home, understand that they have a place within the bank, understand that they can contribute towards the economic growth of our society, but also towards the growth of Nedbank in general. In society, I think we have so far about 200 or so ATMs that we have lowered for people who are using wheelchairs to be able to access the ATMs themselves. And it is really for us about ensuring that the concessions and accommodations we make allow for everybody to understand that they have a role to play, but that they should not be impeded in any way from giving their best selves in the workplace.
Absolutely, Katlego. That's really encouraging, and upwards of 600 employees or people living with disabilities on your workforce is a significant number, and the accommodations and support you mentioned is imperative. In fact, in the South African youth policy, it is almost a mandatory requirement for organizations to make accommodations. And it's in the youth policy. In South Africa, more than 38%, 38.4% of societies between 15 and 35, which is what is called youth. And of those, the policy recommends that their economic participation be considered as paramount. Now, Holly, I want to come to you on that because, I mean, this makes you fall squarely in the demographic of youth. And in your experience, can you share your personal journey with and your view on this question of disability inclusion? You know, from your perspective, having grown up, now you're in university, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced as a disabled student?
Hello, thank you. I think definitely it's the attitudes of people in the environment that you find yourself, and it doesn't matter which environment, it kind of follows you everywhere. And I'm sure Georgia can attest to this. You have to learn how to navigate people who don't think that you are capable of doing what you are capable of doing. And it definitely started when I was at school, but luckily St. Teresa's is a brilliant environment for empowerment and teaching you to have a voice to get what you need. So I'm really thankful that I went to school there. But the same sort of happened at WITS, and luckily WITS has also a disability rights unit, which is essentially a team of people who are dedicated to assisting disabled students and staff on campus with any issues they may face. And it was really nice to have that support. But even so, I definitely think it's the attitude of people and the stigma that people attach to disability that is probably the biggest challenge. Obviously, aside from the actual physical barriers, which is the big part of the Look Up campaign that Melanie will speak to later, is actually being able to access these institutions. I will say that WIT has been probably the most accessible place I've been in my life, which, if you think about it, is actually quite sad, because that means that only I'm now 5 years into WITS. 5 years of my 22 years of living have been a place where I could be most independent and most myself and do things for myself. But I definitely think it's a change in attitude, because with the change in attitude comes the change in the physical barriers and things that stop us physically as disabled people.
That's quite sobering that it takes a person going through the schooling system that many years to get to a point where there's an effective approach to inclusion from a practical sense. But that leads me to my next two questions then. And the first is on representation. I mean, we all speak about representation and we say representation matters. Have you had any role models that have inspired you and supported you? And how has that impacted your journey? And then more than that, how has that impacted how you're preparing for your career? Does your university prepare you for the transition from being in higher education into a working environment? And what additional support do you think is helpful? And more than that, I mean, we know you on this panel, and we know you're a dynamic, capable, and very well accomplished young lady. But do you think corporate South Africa is ready for you in every sense, as to welcome an employee with a disability?
So I'll start with the first question, so about representation. In terms of somebody with a disability that has been represented to me, I can honestly say I don't think I have one. Just because if there's any media representation of anyone with a disability, it's generally within the light of, oh, they're so inspiring, they went to the Olympics, which is not your general, like, I'm not going to the Olympics, I just want to have a job and live my life like everybody else does. Or it's, oh, so sad, look, they've had a disability their whole life, what a sad experience. So it's very much a polarized spectrum. So in my life, I haven't really had anyone with a disability as a role model. But in terms of just a general role model, I definitely say there's this man called Roy Gluckman, and he is very big in the DEI space. And I happened to randomly be a part of his master's thesis on, he was doing it on marginalized groups, and then I was part of the study, and he's sort of taken me under his wing in terms of mentorship and teaching you to take up space and be yourself and get what you want and fight for things you think are important. So I think that has definitely given me the skill to do this kind of thing. So I think Roy Gluckman is a huge one for me. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. And then in terms of whether corporate is ready for me, sorry, I've just seen somebody in the chat saying, what is my disability? I have cerebral palsy, and then which I was born with, and then in 2021 I was diagnosed type 1 diabetes, which under the South African Employment Equity Act is considered a disability. So in terms of whether corporate is ready for me, which is important because I'm going into law, I don't think so. But I think it's going to be one of those things that just has to happen while you do it, because there's no other choice, and they'll have to make themselves ready for me, and I'll help along the way. But as long as people, it goes back to attitude, as long as people are open and considerate, I think it can be done. I've actually signed articles at a firm for 2026, and one of the hugest reasons why I signed with them is because prior to the interview, the day before, the graduate recruitment officer called me and said, I'm aware you have a disability, I'm aware you're coming for an interview, is there anything I need to do to make sure that you feel accommodated and safe in our space? And that was a huge plus for me. So I immediately signed with them when I got an offer. I'm really, really grateful for my offer. And I think if people have that kind of attitude, then things are going to be okay. So yeah, that's my thought on corporate South Africa at the moment.
Some fairly encouraging green shoots there in terms of accommodation. But going from young to younger to youngest, I'm going to ask Georgia a question. Now Georgia, you're currently right in the thick of your high school career, and I just want you to let us know, tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, and what inclusion means to you. And then let us know a little bit of, how you think your school community understands and supports disability inclusion.
Well, a little bit about my journey is when I was younger. Well, even now, I go to schools that have smaller groups, that have smaller communities, which leads to it being more accessible in a way, because I struggle in crowds. Because of my disability, I lose my balance quite easily. So in smaller schools with smaller communities, it's quite easy to go from class to class, depending on how far they are. And I feel like I connect better with smaller communities. So that's what I have to find, my parents would have to find throughout my academics and school years. When I was younger, I would go to have Botox every 6 months. So what that would do was that my doctor would inject Botox into the muscles in my legs that I overused, so that I could go to physiotherapy to train the muscles that were supposed to be doing the jobs to become stronger, which would then help me with my movements and lessen my stiffness. With that, I also do all types of therapy. I did occupational therapy, I do physiotherapy, I did hippotherapy, which is horseback riding, which I think is my personal favorite. And in terms of my school being accessible and accepting, St. Teresa's is a very welcoming and accepting school. Because it is a smaller school, I find it easier to go from class to class. The children there are very curious, and there are people who are curious and want to know why I walk the certain way that I do, and instead of being rude about it, as some people are, they choose to just ask questions, which I'm perfectly fine with, and I educate them, and I explain that I was born with cerebral palsy. And I feel like for me, when people understand why I am the way I am, that can tell them that I'm open to a conversation and that I'm not a scary person, and that it's like sets a foundation for a relationship with that person.
Absolutely. So it's all about courtesy, consideration, kindness, and openness to learn about other people, which is great. But how is your personal situation, your personal physical disability affecting how you are thinking about a career? You're moving into a stage in school where you have to choose the subjects that will get you into the varsity that you want, the subjects that you want. How does it change this?
I definitely have to be more. There's definitely limitations. I definitely have to do more research in terms of the type of universities that I want to go to. Are they accessible? Are they? Is there a place for me if I need a support system in that university? Are there people I can go to? With careers, I want to be a pediatrician because my doctors have inspired me to help other children. For that career, I have to think about things like, will I be able to walk around the hospital? Will I be able to go attend my meetings, the stairs? Is there a place for me to feel welcome and safe in the place that I want to work in the future? One of the things I did realize today at my school when we had a career expo is that I was speaking to one of the universities, asking them about their accessibility. And they said that on my application, I would have to state my disability and what was needed for me to go there and what I needed to be accessible. And they said that they would have to check first if their place is accessible for me, and if it's not, I wouldn't be able to go to that university because I wouldn't be able to cope with how it was built.
That's very sobering, and in fact, it actually goes against inclusive education policies in this country. So where we do have these policies that are fairly specific about what inclusion means, what level of accommodations are required, we can see that the implementation has been slow, and just from Georgia's story that they're somewhat inadequate. So I mean, I think that's a strong challenge, you know, to institutions, corporates, educational facilities to really consider, you know, inclusion in this way. I mean, I think on that, Melanie, you've probably come across this kind of thing very often. So I want to come to you and ask you to share your journey of a mother advocating for inclusion into mainstream education. What do you see the role of education is in empowering the youth, you know, to achieve their potential and to get where they want to go?
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so it obviously hasn't been a journey of, you know, no stumbling blocks. We always had to think ahead. For instance, when Georgia was diagnosed, I mean, I had no idea what lied ahead for me. I didn't understand the landscape of inclusion in our country and in education. And it needed me to actually educate myself around what that meant. You know, I started engaging with schools, and the sad part about that was that I realized that my daughter would not necessarily at that point be easily accepted into a mainstream environment. So number one, it limited our choice for education, or quality education at that. And then it was about, you know, the environments that she goes into, how accommodating are these environments, how socially adept are, you know, the communities. The big thing for me as a mother was the bully factor. We hear about bullying at school all the time, and that was a massive worry for me. So it also meant that my journey as Georgia's mother was one of strength. I needed to teach my daughter to be strong. It was one of the big things I always enforced with her was the word can't does not exist in your vocabulary. And up until today, I think it's one of the big things that stands, that's very obvious in her character, is that can't is not an option. Mm-hmm. So we will either find ways and means to get around it, but doing it, we will. So, yeah, it was always having to try and think ahead and finding ways and means. And then in terms of the communities and youth and corporates, I think it's just realizing that we are in a very different age now than what we were a few years back. I mean, digitizing a job spec, for instance, can very easily be accommodating to a person with disability. If environment is a challenge, why can't a role be digitized? I think that would optimize opportunity for persons with disability. And the same then goes for what we've come to know about the minimum number of students with disability accessing universities. It's not necessarily the university that has a problem with accommodation or accessibility. It's our mainstream schools, because they are not accessible as we may think. A ramp and a toilet and a rail here and there is not enough. There's bigger issues that we need to consider, hence the hashtag Look Up campaign.
Absolutely. Melanie, you've certainly taken action, and ladies and gentlemen in this panel, this is an interactive panel. We've already asked you to say, what is your call to action? Melanie, you've mentioned a couple of things about digital, about, being inclusive, and I'm challenging all of you on the line. Let us know, what would you, if you were the one calling the shots, what would you absolutely demand that corporate gets to do or starts doing to make sure that we are more and more disability confident and disability inclusive? Katlego, I'm going to come back to you. We've gone through quite a bit of discussion here, and we started off here talking about the youth. And I mean, you're in a big organization, and implementing diversity and inclusion initiatives is always challenging. They're specific, generally, for any reason, talk about women, about anything, it's a challenge. But what are the specific sensitivities and complexities that affect how young people or young employees experience the value and engagement that we try to implement as D&I practitioners or corporates across the board? And in your view, what do the best companies do to get this right?
Look, I think for us, one of the things that are quite important, and it cuts across, I think if we get this right as corporates, we would be able to really reap the fruit of it, is creating a psychologically safe environment. And that, I think, is a very major thing that corporates have got to do, because if we don't get that right, then people are not safe to declare their disabilities. People are not safe to say, look, we want to actually give of our best, but these are the things you need to do to accommodate us. People are not safe to say, we think you're going in the wrong direction in this respect, and therefore we need to actually move in another direction. Sometimes I think that our older colleagues and peers tend to think it a bit disrespectful when younger colleagues come through very robustly and forthright in some of their disagreements about things, saying, but this is a professional space. And the workplace has changed, Catherine, significantly. And I think that we need to embrace those changes, and we need to understand what it is when people are not willing to tolerate practices that they view as abusive, that potentially other generations views as normal. Or viewed as normal. And we need to be willing to say that, okay, can we take a step back? This is not necessarily disrespect, but the person feels safe enough to say, I don't agree with this. And how do we make it better? How do we instill a culture of learning across the board? And of course, to use the buzzwords at the moment, how do we unlearn some of the things that are not good and relearn what it means to be a colleague, learn what barriers and boundaries are, learn how young people are also able to lead despite their age, and to be given the responsibility that comes with the support of more experienced colleagues.
No, absolutely. It's all about that vulnerability. First, in the youth, to express your power, to say what you want to do, and that vulnerability for everybody else around to acknowledge that there are differences and to be open to hearing the difficult things. We're all past this age 35, so we should be open to being told where we got it all wrong, where we set up the system wrong, and what we should be changing. And it really is part of this ongoing dialogue for progress, right? And in saying that, then, Holly, if we're talking about progress, youth empowerment, disability inclusion, what would you say are the most effective, or in your experience, have been the most effective strategies and actions in empowering the youth, especially those with disabilities? And what advice would you give to companies on disability inclusion or inclusion in general?
I honestly only have one piece of advice, and it's just listening. Well, with listening comes actually being willing to then take the suggestions or thoughts into account, because I could talk to you for hours about things that I think would make certain situations better, but if there's going to be no action that follows to actually implement those and try, because I'm sure again I can speak for Georgia when I say that it's fine if things don't work the first time. Like disability and generally getting through life is trial and error. So I'm not going to sit there and be like enraged that the first thing we tried to make something better didn't work and now you don't care about me and da, da, da. Generally disabled people are not like that, because our life is just try and try again until you get it right. So it's just the patience to listen to thoughts that we might have on making something more accessible, and then having the will to then implement those when the time comes. I'm just thinking in terms of when I was at school, we didn't have an accessible bathroom in the school for a long time, and it actually happened by accident, where I said that in a public setting, honestly by accident, not to call out St. Louis or anything. I was just saying, I don't even have a bathroom I can go to safely. And straight after that, the principal at the time said to me, we have to do something about this. And all it took was me standing up and saying, I actually have a problem with this, and her listening and saying, that is a problem, for it to be fixed. And now the school does have a disabled, an accessible toilet. So I mean, that's just one example in my life, but I just think that's really how it's going to work, is just listening and then implementing and trial and error.
Absolutely. I know in our diversity and inclusion policy, we do have an approach that says listen to make a change, listen to improve things. And you really do make a strong point for that. Sneh, I can see your question, your hand up. If it can wait till the end, we'll come to it. Otherwise, I just want to emphasize from Holly's point of view that it's about tenacity, it's about commitment, and it's about continuing to drive. We're not going to fix anything in a day, but it's for everybody to keep their eye on the ball. We're coming up into wrap up, and I want to thank everyone for all their comments and for coming in and interacting on the chat. We're coming to that at the end, but I want to come to you, Georgia, and get from you a little bit of a perspective on where we take this from here. And I want to do a little bit of a grown-up teacher thing and say, can you finish this sentence? So when young people are fully included in all aspects of social and economic life, then
disabled people are able to step into the best versions of themselves. They are able to get opportunities that they weren't before. They are able to have things that they never dreamed of, and being included would truly bring a new source of confidence and something new out of that disabled person. Because personally for me, when I was young and I thought I couldn't do something before my mom taught me that I can, I would be very sad or disappointed in myself throughout my life. But if I was included and people were making a change that would help me, I would be more confident and I would be more open to people and trying new things, knowing that if it does fail, it's okay. And if I succeed because of people being willing to change things and being open to having an inclusive space for me, I would be able to do so much more than I imagined. And I think that's the same for all disabled people, that if you are inclusive and you are open to change, then we can truly step into the best version of ourselves and climb over that tall mountain that we never thought was possible and break those limitations and barriers.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely inspiring. So I mean, there's very little to add to that, but I guess the idea is if underlying the idea of inclusion and diversity is that every single person has something to add to the common human goal of whatever it means to be successful as humanity. Equally within corporates, every single person has something to add. So making an environment where everyone can do that can only lead to achievement beyond what individual or narrow and less diverse groups can achieve. So thank you very much for that. To bring the whole idea to an end and to talk about action and doing and moving things along, I just want to come to you, Melanie, and ask you to tell us a little bit about the Look Up campaign, which was inspired by our very own Georgia, and your experiences and your combined experiences, and tell us what it's about, its objectives, long-term ambitions, and how we can get involved.
Thanks, Catherine. So the idea was really inspired by a very everyday school run drive with Georgia. And as I was driving and just looking at my surroundings, Georgia was on her cell phone and very little time spent observing what was going on around her. And I saw this beautiful tree with stunning pink blossoms, and as the sun was hitting it, I was so taken aback by its beauty. And I realized that Georgia is stuck on this screen of hers. And I actually said to her, Georgia, look up, and she looked up and she was like, wow, that is so beautiful. And that was on the back of us having experienced Georgia having major surgery to both her legs. It was a 10-hour operation, and she was in a wheelchair for 2 years. And in recovery, we had to navigate the stairs at school. So when I saw this, I was inspired by actually making a difference. How can we impact and change how children actually enter into mainstream environments through wheelchair accessibility? So that's how the whole campaign came together. And it's really just about making classrooms more accessible, allowing children with physical disability who are cognitively sound to actually have a tertiary experience, and it begins in the grassroots level. So as I mentioned earlier, universities are not seeing enough children coming into their spaces because our mainstream environments are not inclusive. So if we can change that, give more children with disability access, it means that more learners would be able to access university, and they will become big and beautiful independent individuals. So by collaborating with art galleries, artists, corporates, individuals, to actually turn their inspirational thoughts, the things that they see that inspire them, that could potentially speak to inclusion, turning that into a form of art, and then submitting that piece of art. We have a team of curators from the BKHZ Art Gallery in Rosebank who will professionally curate the art pieces. We will put those art pieces in an exhibition. There they will be auctioned off and sold for the highest price, and that will go towards our lift. So St. Teresa's is the pilot project, and funds raised there will obviously be our first initiative, but we're also hoping to get learnings from this exercise so that from there we are able to roll this project or campaign out across South Africa. And corporates can participate by actually nominating schools in the communities that they are active in who have the same challenges, and make their schools and their environments more accessible. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's three key aspects. One is to raise the funds. We have to raise 790,000 Rand to buy and install the wheelchair lift at St. Teresa's. We target to have this done and dusted by the end of the year, so that by January 2025, we can cut that ribbon and celebrate our amazing achievements, and that will give birth to the rollout across South Africa. How you can contribute is either through donor funding, participate in our fundraising initiatives. We've got a couple coming up. We've got a golf day happening. We've got a corporate wheelchair race happening in October. And we have, of course, the exhibition. So those are all initiatives that we are hoping to raise the necessary funds. Please reach out to me at creative@hummingbirdmarketing.co.za, and I'll provide you with more information. And then just coming together to collaborate, building a network of individuals and companies to raise awareness so everybody knows somebody who is able to make a contribution. And that's what we're wanting in terms of building an allyship around this. Just talk to us. We're very happy to collaborate. We're very happy to come and talk to your communities just so that we can get the support. And then promoting the art of artists, upcoming artists and professional artists, as well as our girls who are currently busy with the curation of their art pieces. And it's journeying with them, arranging art mentorship mornings where they will actually interact with professional artists, up and coming artists, to actually just inspire them and guide them along the beautiful pieces that they will be creating. And it's not just limited to paint, it's sculpting, it's photography, anything that you consider worthy of an exhibition piece. That is what we are looking for. And it can come from families, from individuals, from schools, from sports communities, whatever. If you're up for the challenge, please submit your applications, and that will help us greatly. Next slide, please. Okay, so the call to action that we have is how to get involved, become an ally, sign up and join this movement. Our allies are then allowed to recruit more allies, and they can advocate for this cause. Open up the doors for sponsors, invite us to come and talk about this initiative. Let us be a part of your community so that we can promote and talk about inclusivity in our schools. Participate in our fundraising events. That will be an awesome help as well. And then become a sponsor, commit to resources. And resources is not just money. There's other resources in terms of art supplies. The girls actually need art supplies to create their art pieces. There's contributions towards the exhibition event. There's funds for a website that we need, a online a store where we can actually sell the art pieces. So there's all sorts of ways that we can that you can become an ally and a sponsor. And then just talk about this, foster inclusion, celebrate diversity, and support us on this journey. Next slide, please. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melanie. I mean, and that's really inspiring. I think it's quite an apt name for such an ambitious and purposeful project. We wish you all the best, and we invite everybody here to think about how to get involved. Remember, in the diversity and inclusion space, all action is valid action. And having said that, we, I think, come to the end of our panel discussion piece, and we've heard quite a bit around diversity and inclusion. Katlego told us about the key initiatives and key strategies and action that actually work. Quite a commendable effort going on in his place of employment with a really large contingent of people with disabilities working there. He has cautioned us to mind the generational gap, to be open to what that might mean in delivering these initiatives. Holly speaking quite strongly about accommodations, coming out there as being being an accommodating individual and accommodating workplaces, also for speaking up as young people, stating, what exactly do you need? And often that gets the right ear. And Georgia really encouraging us to, be open, be kind, be inclusive, and also to be ambitious, and include everybody in our thinking. All very, very inspiring. And Melody, yes, we're all going to try and #look up and get involved in any way that we can. So, I mean, if I can hand over to you, Bianca, to see what's happening in our chats and pick up on some of those questions that have come through.
So there's no questions. There's just a few thank yous, and then there's a we are struggling with finding candidates that have disclosed living with disabilities, and sadly people are leveraging off making money for recruiting purposes. There was also mentioned about bathrooms. Bathrooms need to be looked at specifically for people with disabilities. But other than that, only good and positive feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that Nashlene's hand is up, and I think you raise a really important point about disclosures, in the workplace and generally prior to employment, which is an issue. I don't know if you've got anything you want to state now, and maybe once you've positioned your point here, maybe Katlego, you can maybe pick up on what your experience has been on disclosures around disability, perhaps in the recruitment process. Nashleen, anything to add here? I see your hand was up.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I think this was really, really informative. Thank you to our speakers who have been brave enough to share their stories. Your efforts are commendable. Hopefully, from a youth perspective, we're going to make positive changes. I think from my end, in as much as a lot of people think around this as being a compliance or a tick box exercise, we need to go back. And we need to start holding people accountable. And by accountable, I mean, go back to our organizations, ask for, doing a disability analysis. Don't make assumptions. Don't say that people in a wheelchair expect you to open a door. Ask people, what help do you need? Do you want me to do X, Y, and Z? And I think that we are doing ourselves a little bit of an injustice due to assumptions based on either our biases or our experiences. But if we do lifestyle analyses on people that are living beyond their means, why can't we do disability access audits, analyses on business accessibility? Because I think that will help us in terms of, and I'm not going to call it reasonable accommodation. I think mindset, it's for access accommodation. We don't want to reasonably accommodate people because that is belittling and demifying people that are living with disabilities. For me, it's more around saying, what access do I need to consider to make you the best version of yourself that you can possibly be, to add value despite your disability? And I'm so sorry that I'm sounding really, really passionate, but in my organization, I drive, DEIB, lots of things that we need to learn. It is going to unfortunately start with education, whether it's at grassroots level, whether it's a leadership commitment level. But that's how I feel about it, and I'm going to be quiet now. If anyone also wants to reach out to me, you're more than welcome to. Novia knows me quite well, and we can take it from there.
Thank you for that, Nashleen. We love the passion. We'll never say no to someone passionate on a discussion like this. Katlego, anything to add?
No, I think I will cede my time, Chair, to my People Living with Disabilities chairperson, who's actually raised his hand, Sabulela Lucas. So he has graciously joined. I think he is visually impaired, as it were. So his absolute experience is personal, but also he's got a lot of insights to share. So I'll keep quiet going forward, and his will be the spotlight.
Lucas, over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Katlego. Thanks, ma'am. Thanks everyone for such an informative session. I think it's quite a crucial point where the point of departure that you guys are moving from, ma'am, looking at diversity and inclusion from a grassroots point of view. Let me open it up first. You find that mostly we are met with comments, and I'm speaking about generally the employment landscape in the country, that where do we find persons with disabilities, number one. Number two, do we have persons with disabilities who possess the necessary qualifications qualifications to gain employment, entry to employment. Now, the latter part of these 2 points that I've posed is that yes, there are persons with disabilities, but you then find one, there are barriers in terms of gaining entry into the workplace. Might it be gatekeeping from other persons with disabilities, or might it be lack of knowledge or specific persons with disabilities knowledge in the space that is required to get the person with disability to the employment stage? Now, moving to closer to perhaps the point of this webinar is that here in SA, I'm not saying it must be promulgated, but it's something we have to look at. If you look at this the attendees of this webinar. It's we've got youth, you know, youth in school, youth in tertiary, and then we've got representatives from companies who employ persons with disabilities. Now that needs a straight on deliberate effort to actually harness that space to make sure we've got a pipeline of people feeding into those three places. Obviously, starting at grassroots, special schools, you know, going to special schools or learning centers, high school for persons with disabilities, tertiary level, and then employment. Now, there need to be linkages in between those three things, you know, because where we are now, they're totally in isolation, you know, and then you find that now that's where we lose our persons with disabilities in those cracks. And then you find that that's why our person with disability lacks the confidence, you know, to actually break through those barriers. And then no one holding our, I would say, tertiary institutions up to the task. You might find there are persons with disability organization in the communities, but they largely dependent on government funding. So now, how are you gonna hold someone accountable if that person is actually giving you the bread on the table? So we need to ask those pertinent questions, actually have answers to that, and have people coming together, you know, in that space. And furthermore, if you look at perhaps in the persons with disabilities organizations, or let me put it like that, services. I'm going to say government, that's our largest employee. Now, if you look there, who's heading up those units? Is it persons with disabilities or not? So, how is the landscape in the country going to change if then those types of people are not persons with disability themselves who are affected? You know, just a comment and perhaps possible suggestions going forward from myself. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lucas. There's so much in there. We feel we must probably have. Melanie's been nodding. She's been, mentioning, possible solutions. So definitely a discussion to pick up on. And thank you so much for that. Really detailed and thought-provoking contribution to the discussion. Now, Holly, I see you've got your hand up, and I'm intrigued. Tell us. You're on mute.
Sorry, it was just in response to Nashleen's comment, we are struggling with finding candidates that have disclosed living with disabilities. On disability disclosure, because I've literally been applying for jobs in the last 3 months, I think, first of all, I think it depends on the disability, because I can't not disclose my disability. It's very obvious that I have one because I use a walker. So there would be no way of me getting around that. But in terms of people wanting to actually disclose their disabilities, I think it comes from the fact that people don't feel safe enough in any environment, but in corporate environment especially, because so often your worth in a corporate environment is tied to your productivity, and physical disabilities and disabilities in general definitely impact on how productive you can be, not in terms of the amount, because you can definitely keep up with your colleagues, but maybe in the way that, in the time frame that it's expected from you, or in the way that it might be expected from you. And I think if companies and corporates are more willing to show to people that they are more flexible with what they expect from employees in general, but specifically in this case, disability employees with disability, and also generally open to showing that we won't discriminate against you because you have a disability when you join us, then maybe people would be more open to disclosing their disabilities. I know from personal experience that my disability was a big thing for people recruiting me to go and work there, because I do tick boxes for them. But that is a double-edged sword. If you're going to employ me because I tick boxes for you, then you also need to come to the front and be open and willing to then make the accommodations necessary that I need to work for you. So I think if corporates are more deliberate in their messaging to people with disabilities in terms of employment, and saying that we will accept you when you come to this office, and this is what we've done to make that happen, then you might not have such an issue with how people disclose their disabilities.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. It is definitely a quid pro quo. So Martha.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I think this conversation, especially when it comes to corporate being transparent or being reasonably accommodative, is very close to my heart because I'm in the learning space. So I always take a stance of, for me, if we are going to take someone who has a disability, we need to be able to create an environment that's going to help them succeed in their career. And I don't want to lie, in the chat, from a learning perspective, it is quite difficult because there's different types of disabilities that we need to cater for. And sometimes the way in which the work itself is set up does set us back, right? So we in the learning space are supposed to help you grow and enable that growth through learning interventions. So I'll make a simple example. If you come into corporate, there's compliance training, for instance, that you need to do. There's a mandatory and training that are specific to your role. From a design perspective, when we design, we need to be cognizant of all types of disabilities, and to be able to cater for that is quite a challenge. But I would like to reassure you, as the youth, that there are people like me within corporate spaces that do think about those types of considerations, and we are working on it. For instance, I rely mainly on international standards that look at accessibility, and generally they will look at like visual impairments, they will look at cognitive as well, because we're barely just touching the surface when it comes to disability, because there's so many, right? There's mental disabilities as well. There's quite a lot. So we do try that for the people that we have, we give them special attention. And what Holly mentioned, I attended a DEIB workshop last year, and it comes across to say it's very important to listen, but more importantly, involve the people in the process, because we can't, and I don't mean to sound insensitive, but we might not be able to relate to the challenges that the people have. And the only way we can cater to those challenges is to give them an ear and co-create that experience and a harmonious work environment with working with the people with disabilities. And I'll submit there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martha. I mean, it's clear you have the experience to speak on this and the commitment to make a difference where you are. And again, I think I speak for everyone that who's been on this call, that it's been a really, really engaging, empowering, and informative discussion. And I want to bring it to an end, and thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Holly. We're really, really excited to have had you on. Katlego, thank you for your insights, your experience from your perspective as well, and thank you for going to netball this morning. I hope it wasn't a cold 7 o'clock netball start as it usually is, but thank you again also for that. more importantly, we spoke in the beginning to say that we're trying to create and use the platforms. We want to thank our hosts, Novia One, for really coming to the party. Like we said, all action for diversity and inclusion is good action, is valid. And just by setting up this call, by inviting everybody, by doing all the background work to make this happen, we really want to say a big thank you to Novia One for being a great ally of the Look Up campaign and a great champion of diversity and inclusion. Thank you everyone for joining. Please do keep focused on diversity and inclusion in any way that you're involved, and think about these things and challenge yourselves and others. Accept the power of the youth, be vulnerable, allow them to tell you where we've done it all wrong. And as the youth, remember, it's never going to be a safe and warm and fuzzy place for you to express your power. Just do it anyway, because the youth that went before you did it anyway, and look where we are, all here together. So thank you, everybody, and we'll speak again soon.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Cheers. Bye.